Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Autism Stories. I'm your host, Doug Bletcher, the founder of Autism Personal Coach. Autistic people are the true experts of the autistic experience, and Autism Stories is where we interview autistic people to learn from their stories, experiences, and get their insights. If you would like to be notified about each week's episode of Autism Stories, we suggest you subscribe on your favorite podcast listening platform. We would also appreciate it if you could give us a positive rating and review, as it will help others to learn about autism stories. On today's episode, Britney G joins us to discuss her autistic experience living in the Bahamas, misophonia, and training to be a pastry cook. We hope you enjoy today's conversation. Brittany, thanks so much for joining me here on Autism Stories.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here.
I'd love to start out by learning about your story. Where does your story in the autistic community begin?
I should state it doesn't begin in childhood, unfortunately. I grew up in the early 2000s in a very small country, so autism education is very limited. So my parents literally didn't know any better. They always suspected something was different besides just being quirky, but they didn't have the info. So because I was able to get through my childhood, get through school fairly okay, I had some friends I did fine in school. I communicated well enough. I flew under the radar, but they always suspected something. It wasn't until about age 18, turning 19, that we started getting more information, and my mom and I started to put the pieces together. Everything started to make more sense, and I and people like us, when we get interested in something, we get interested in something. So we were doing our research like it was nobody's business. And by 21, I not only saved up enough for an assessment, but I found an institution who assesses adults. So I was able to get an assessment. And by April 2021, I was officially diagnosed. And shortly after I got diagnosed, I graduated from university. And I was at home job hunting, not knowing what to do with myself, but still in the learning process, still in the curiosity phase, still trying to figure out autism and how all of this works. Therefore, so in June of that year, I created my Instagram page called BAH Autistic or Bah Autistic. I decided I'd been in the Instagram autism community for a while, and I had noticed that it was very first world centered, so lots of US, UK, European centered, and I didn't see any voices that I could relate to on a socio-political level. They were discussing things that I couldn't even fathom in a million years. So I decided, someone from my socio-political background, their voice could be appreciated in this community.
Absolutely. And you're from the Bahamas. What's been your experience in terms of being a Bahamian as it relates to your autistic experience?
Uh, it's definitely a mixed bag. I can't say whether it's been good or bad because each side of the coin has its experiences. I will say, in general, Bahamians are very social people. They are very outgoing, they're very extroverted, they're very loud. So you can imagine I have had my challenges with communicating with my fellow Bahamians. They've had their challenges trying to understand people like me. They, like I said, information over here is very limited. We get it a lot later than, say, bigger countries like the USA or the UK. So they see people like me, and their first assumption is strange, abnormal, weird. Call 911. You're scaring me. However, I will admit that The good-hearted ones, which are most of them, once I explain it to them in a way they understand, and they start to get it, and it starts to make sense of it. It starts to make sense to them. Sorry, they become very accepting in their own weird brass way or crass way. Sorry, like for instance, they'll probably they won't be very politically correct, but they'll still be kind to you. So if someone, like, say, I'll give an example of my childhood. I was very typically autistic toddler, and I had a lot of big cousins growing up. They didn't understand why I was the way they was, but they just accepted it. And when other children would try to intimidate me, they were their fists came out. So that's kind of the gist of it. Bahamians don't really get it that well, but once they do get it, they kind of.
You brought up the point that you didn't see a lot of socio-political accounts from autistic people, and I'm wondering, like, what's been that process of finding and connecting with people that you feel like relate to similar experiences that you've had from an autistic perspective.
It took long, but I am grateful that I was patient because they're popping up as my people. Now that my account has gotten to where it is now, people message me all the time saying, I'm not Bahamian, but I'm also from a small nation, and I very much can relate to, you know, reading from autistic people from these big countries talking about things and services they have access to that I had never even heard of until I got diagnosed and listened to these people. So I always felt out of place. I always felt like I didn't belong. So it's really nice to read from somebody who can also relate to that. Because in the beginning, like I said, it was a lot of Americans, a lot of Europeans, and I would get the occasional small nation. I have a couple Puerto Ricans. I have a few Americans with Caribbean descent, so they have Caribbean lineage. They have family members still in the Caribbean. And recently, I even got a few Bahamians. I've had Bahamians finding it. They're not autistic Bahamians, but they are Bahamians. And when those Bahamians then meet people who relate to my experiences, they point them to me. So they say, hey, I know this girl on Instagram. She's Bahamian and she's autistic. Follow her and you can reach out to her. She's very friendly. She talks to anybody who DMs her. It's stuff like that. So I'm grateful for the patience because now obviously I'm also grateful for the Americans and Europeans I met because their experiences are still valid and they're still valuable. And I've learned a lot from them. But had it not been for them, I wouldn't have found the people who I can relate to. So I am still grateful for them, and I am also very grateful for that patience because it finally came, and I now have a little community of people who I can relate to. I say things to them like how going to school over here or going to church over here, and they just get it. So I'm very grateful for that patience.
For many of us as autistic people, we have co-occurring conditions, and one of the co-occurring conditions I believe you have is misophonia, which impacts our lives in terms of specific sounds that can trigger emotional responses. So I'm wondering how much you might think that the ableism of others and their responses maybe to you impacts your misophonia.
Oh yeah, the misophonia is even less understood than autism is, because if you tell a Bahamian you're autistic, they will have a general idea of what you're talking about. But when you bring up misophonia, they're like, Misa who? My own therapist didn't even get it. I had to send her resources and stuff. She has an understanding of it now, but the ableism, it's not been deadly. It's made life very, very hard, especially as a child when I didn't have the language to articulate what I was experiencing and how I am not doing this to be difficult. I am genuinely in distress and I cannot take this anymore. And then it also, I have to say, it's something a lot of people a lot of misophoniacs do talk about but doesn't get heard enough is how it impacts your relationship with your families and your loved ones because people you love dearly can still trigger you. And your body does not care about your relationship with them. When your body gets triggered, it doesn't care. It just wants to start punching. So it's made making relationships, maintaining relationships, and getting out and communicating and socializing with people very difficult because not only do they just not get it, even if they did, there's nothing they can do to make it better because most of these triggers are everyday sounds that we don't have any control over. They can't control it, I can't control it. So there's nothing they can do to make it better. So it's been hard. It's been very hard. Yeah.
Something that I think about almost on a daily basis is how the media talks, writes, and shows our autistic experiences. So, since you have a bachelor's degree in media, I thought you might be a good person to ask this. Where do you see the current state of the media in the coverage of autistic people?
It's getting there. It's come a very long way since I was a child growing up watching the news, but we still got some learning to do. I recall one class in particular where I think it was my senior capstone class, and I did my capstone on autism, of course. And my lecturer told me that when it's time to interview, when it's time to edit your interview with your autistic interviewee, you're gonna have to list them as person with autism. And I tried to tell him some people don't prefer that term. What do I do if my interviewee doesn't prefer that term? They prefer to be called autistic person. And he said, I understand what you're saying and I don't disagree. However, being a journalist, you have to follow the rules of the style guide, and that's what the style guide states. Even though this is just school for now, you can get in trouble for not listening to the style guide. I'm not trying to dismiss your feelings or your information because I believe you, but it is what it is. And that's something that has been bothering me ever since, not because of he said it, not because of what he said, because I have no ill will towards him. I agree with what he said. Sometimes you just have to do what you have to do. But the fact that journalists can't even respect the identity of autistic people and how they prefer to be referred to because they don't want to lose their job or worst of all get arrested is kind of sad because it's not something they can control at the moment. We can There are things we can do to bring awareness to it and to make and to eventually get to the point where these laws and rules can be changed and adjusted. But that's not an overnight process. So you kind of just have to suck it up and deal with it until real change can be made. And like I said, real change takes time. So that's just one aspect of it. But in general, autism representation, I do think it's gotten better. And right now, I don't necessarily think it's the journalists and necessarily the media itself. That's the big problem right now. I think it's the recipients to an extent and the information they're being given. Because a lot of these journalists don't know where to look, they end up getting their information from the one place they know where to look, from the medical industry. And while I'm not going to downplay the progress and the hard work they've done to make autism education and assessments and diagnosis successful as it can get at this point, a lot of the information they tend to put out is very uninformed and just straight up wrong to the point of being ableist. And because these journalists don't know where else to get accurate information from, and they trust them because they're doctors, it turns this is the information that's going out. And it's unfortunate, which is also why I started my advocacy, because if you're going to spread information, at least get it from someone who's living it. So that's just my personal experience.
Now, from my understanding, you're currently enrolled in culinary school to train as a pastry cook. Uh,
Yes.
Pastries are one of my favorite things. But I'm
Mine
wondering
too.
but I'm wondering about the training in terms of how has this training went to maybe meet your accessibility needs?
At first, it wasn't as difficult as I thought it would have been, but it definitely had its challenging moments because I was raised in a society that says keep it to yourself unless absolutely necessary. So I was very discouraged to not disclose my diagnosis, and therefore my teachers didn't know, and therefore didn't know how to help. However, it was getting to the point where I couldn't function in class. So I told my therapist, and she said, I don't care what your mother says, you have to tell them. What they do with that information is a different story. If they refuse to accommodate you, then you have to take it up with the higher ups and do what you gotta do. But you won't see change. Nothing's gonna happen if you don't tell them. So I did. And thankfully, it went very well. My teacher was very understanding. She was very accepting. I specifically told her, I don't want to be babied or coddled. I just want to be accommodated. And she said, I completely understand. So far, you have proven to be a very capable and responsible chef. I completely get it. She said her grandnephew is autistic and she understands. So, witnessing him grow up and develop, she gets how we are capable as long as we're accommodated. So, she said, whatever accommodations you need, just let me know. I won't judge. And I won't tell the class if you don't want me to. And thankfully, my accommodations are very simple, mostly just sensory. I started baking with my earplugs in. They don't drown all noise. I could still hear. It kept me a lot calmer, and I would occasionally take breaks during the baking process, like when our stuff was in the oven, or we were doing a bread and the dough needed to rise. There was nothing we could do at the moment anyway. I would just sit out front for a few minutes, just breathe, drink some water, scroll through information on my interests, and then like 5 minutes later, I just go right back in the kitchen, get back on and finish the day. And of course, like I said, my journey was not perfect. Even with all those accommodations, I still had a meltdown during my final. However, with my teachers being accommodating, they were able to talk me back into reality, calm me down, and get me back on track. And I finished and I passed. And well, now we just got two more classes to go, advanced culinary and cake making and decorating. So once those are done, I'll be finished. However, I have learned so much, and my baking is completely in a completely different playing field than when it used to be when I first started. So I am so regardless of the bad times, I am very grateful for this experience, and I would not trade it for anything.
I love that. Do you have a favorite pastry to make, a go-to?
Chocolate chip cookies.
You can't go wrong with that. Yes.
I agree. I loved I was a chronic Subway eater growing up, and my cookies were my favorite part. And I had always wanted to recreate that cookie, but still, I have all these stomach problems, so no dairy, no gluten, very little egg. So that's also why I started school to help me with that. And fun fact, on my last driving lesson, I baked some cookies the night before just for fun, and I gave him one as a thank you for being patient with me because he has experience with neurodivergent drivers. So my foolishness was nothing. So I gave him some cookies as a thank you for being patient with me and teaching me being teachable. And he bit into it and said, "This did you work at Subway in the past? This tastes like a Subway cookie." And that was the best compliment I've ever gotten. So yeah, I love to bake a lot of stuff. I like to do pumpkin bread, cheesecake, regular birthday cakes, chocolate cake, pies, croissants, danishes. I love to do everything, but cookies will always have my heart.
From what I understand, you also work part-time as a radio producer. Do you think there have been ways that your autism has impacted your work as a radio producer?
Yes, it has very much so. both positively and negatively. We tend to have some sensitive ears. So I think that has been very beneficial to making me more alert to the nuances of my job. You have to listen up certain things that the average listener won't notice, but will still impact the quality of the show. So maybe someone's mic is having a problem, or somebody's turned down too low, somebody's up too high, somebody's voice is just really quiet, so you have to adjust their mic accordingly. Or maybe the phone lines are a bit weird, so you have to adjust accordingly. And that comes in handy because no matter what goes wrong with the show, the producer gets blamed. It could be completely out of our control and we still get blamed. So being able to notice things that the host wouldn't notice or your supervisor wouldn't notice is very beneficial in keeping my supervisor off my behind. But at the same time, my attention span tends to go awry sometimes. I may miss some cues every now and again. I've gotten better at it though. Don't fire me. But there have been some challenges. Sometimes you have a host who's very abrasive with their controversial takes. They can be very loud, or even if they're not loud, they can be very aggressive with their delivery. So you have to filter that out while still maintaining the show. Or maybe if the hosts are having a controversial discussion, the topic they're discussing is very heated, we tend to get a lot of callers calling in to give their input. And you have to, and it's my job to screen them. And I have to make sure they're not calling to say something that'll get the station in trouble. So that can be very overwhelming. For me personally, it's overwhelming for the average radio producer. So imagine there have been times where I just had to turn the phone line off because it was getting so bad. And I've had to hang up on callers because they were bordering on defamation, defaming certain higher ups in the country. It gets chaotic sometimes, and it's not easy to deal with. But thankfully, it's only 2 hours a week, so it's not the worst thing in the world. It's a Saturday morning. I can go home afterwards, nap, eat some junk food, and get it off my system. So it is what it is. But like I said, my family is. I come from a family of radio personalities. My dad is a retired radio show host. He's a retired DJ. My aunt is a radio show host. My other aunt is a radio show host too. My uncle is a radio producer. I come from a family of radio heads. So when I got this opportunity, I was beyond excited. Their jobs looked like a lot of fun, even with the stresses that come with it. Despite all the stresses that I've dealt with, I have no regrets. I love this job. I love this show. I really enjoy spending time with and listening to the hosts. Fun fact, one of the hosts used to be my lecturer once upon a time. So I know him a lot better than I would any other show host. And then the co-host is his wife, so I know him well too. And the other co-host is my classmate, so I know him well too. So I am very happy with the show. I'm very happy producing it. The only thing I would change is my pay, but other than that, I'm happy with it, even with all of the foolishness that comes with it.
And lastly, Brittany, how can our listeners learn more about you beyond this interview?
Okay, so I am on Instagram. You can follow me at BAHAUTISTIC, aka Autistic. That's BAH Autistic. You will know me. My account is very purple. So the very purple, all the purple posts, that's me. You can also follow me on my baking TikTok page at Brits Bakery. That's BRIT apostrophe S and bakery. I don't post often, but I do. I do post. I post baking tutorials and specifically tutorials on how to make your favorite pastries stomach friendly. Because autistic people we tend to struggle with gastrointestinal issues. So I've really taken a big focus on adjusting my pastries to be more gut friendly while still maintaining the quality and flavor. So I post a lot of baking tutorials. and you may get to see my face. You may learn a thing or two. You may learn about a pastry you never heard of. I bake Bahamian pastries on it too. So you can also reach me there. You can also follow my baking account on Facebook, same name, Bert's Bakery. And you can also follow me on Threads. You can access my Threads account through my Instagram account. And if you want more personal posts, you can follow me at Autistic Bahama Mama. That's autistic.bahama.mama. You'll my face is in the photo. And I also post about autistic content there, but it's a lot more personal and a lot less structured. So you get a more real side of me. I also post on my IG stories very often. I talk about my interests often. I talk about my struggles, the things I go through, the things I learn about, just in general, not just about autism. So you may relate to something I post. And pretty much all DMs. I have no social life. I'm chronically online. So if you want to just reach out and say hi, or if you want to ask a question, or tell me your own story, or just share anything, I may not respond right away, but I will respond. I have nothing better to do, I promise.
Well, Brittany, it was wonderful to get to meet you, and I will continue to follow you on social media. Thanks so much for joining me here today.
And thank you so much for reaching out. I am very honored to do my first podcast interview. Yay.
Thanks so much to Brittany for the conversation. To learn more about Brittany, please check out the link in the podcast description for this episode. We always love hearing from you and would especially love to hear from you relating to this episode on what you think the perception of autism is like in your country. Did you know Autism Personal Coach provides neurodiversity affirming support by autistics for autistics? We empower autistic adults and teens to lead self-directed, purpose-driven lives through our customized life coaching and community groups. Our distinct approach prioritizes each client's unique goals and preferences, fostering a sense of agency and promoting self-advocacy. Our coaches work collaboratively with clients to develop personalized strategies and tools that can help with executive functioning, emotional regulation, relationship building, stress management, and much more. We also support parents and partners of autistic people by providing insights and guidance to bridge communication gaps and nurture mutual understanding. With our accessible remote services, individuals from any location can receive the assistance and mentoring they need. So join us today to experience judgment-free coaching rooted in empathy, expertise, and respect for autistic identity. Until next time, I'm Doug Bletcher of Autism Personal Coach. Talk to you then.